Normalizing porn on college campuses as a way of undercutting sexual morality. An interesting interview with Alex Newman about educational rankings, and a really neat experiment at the University of Oklahoma. Next on The Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Every week, we cover those stories impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses across the nation. We are unique in the broad range of our educational coverage. Greetings to all of our loyal listeners, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or anywhere else that you can access podcasts. Never miss an episode. Coming up later, we will be talking to international journalist Alex Newman about the state education ranking system that has just been exposed as the fraud that it is. So stick around for that. First, I want to bring in Katie Petrick of the Healthy Republic to talk top education stories today. Katie.
Well, our culture seems to have a bit of an obsession, I guess, with pornography, and it's starting to show at our universities. At the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, the Chancellor, Joe Gao, recently invited a porn star named Nina Hartley. She's 59 years old, and she's been in the porn industry for 35 years. She's also a sex education activist, and she was invited by the Chancellor to give a 90-minute talk to students, and she talked to about 70 students who actually showed up, and she was paid $5,000 for this. Now, part of the controversy is coming because this Chancellor didn't make it known to the public because he believed that the media would sensationalize this. This was supposed to be part of the National Freedom of Speech Week, and they didn't put any information out on the public calendar, so the public didn't know that this was happening, and he promoted it just from within on the campus TVs, and of course, this is being paid for by student fees.
Yeah, there's so many angles to this story that are so stupid. On college campuses, particularly in the state of Wisconsin, where we have a really bad record of protecting the speech of conservative students, this whole Wisconsin ideal that the idea of free speech on college campuses was born in Wisconsin is utter BS. We have, whenever Ben Shapiro or some major conservative shows up at the University of Wisconsin or the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, always the universities do as little as they have to do to protect those speakers. But in this instance, we have a problem. First of all, you invite a porn star to campus and you pay her under the table, you don't want people to know about it, in the name of free speech, despite the fact that scientists, sociologists, psychologists are talking about the really dangerous effects of pornography addiction across this culture, boys in particular, and alarmingly large number of girls now finding themselves addicted to pornography. It is driving away intimacy, it is destroying the younger generation's ability to actually have meaningful relationships with the opposite sex. All that aside, here's the problem. When we make it our business to teach kids to be sexually responsible, to practice abstinence, to see sexuality as something that is a moral thing, almost first before it's a biological or a physical thing, when we push to attach commitment, trust, love to sexuality, then sexuality becomes a morality issue. When you get rid of that like we have in the American public schools, and it's not just the colleges, right? We did a show last week about how pornography is getting into your kids' middle and high schools, right? Through the EBSCO fiasco. And so when you divorce sex from morality, then sex and pornography go together. If you strip away any moral overview about sexuality and you make it simply a choice or simply fun or simply a recreational thing, then guess what happens? Morality goes away and pornography replaces morality. If sex is okay for little kids, for big kids, for anybody who wants to have sex, for any point in time in history, that all you need is a condom to make sure that any kind of sex goes, then pornography is to sex what morality used to be to sex.
And this is what Chancellor Gao even said. He says he wanted students to know that sexuality plays a healthy role in people's lives. I think the world would be a better place if we were more open about human sexuality. And then Hartley, the porn star, actually told the students she views porn as being safe, consensual fantasy that will intrigue some and offend others. It's okay to like porn. It's okay to not like porn. And it's okay to be confused by porn. You are where you are, and you are who you are.
And to the chancellor of that university, why don't you, speaking of fake sexual apparatuses, why don't you sack up and tell the people publicly, don't try to hide it from your campus, don't try to hide it from the media. Of course the media is going to sensationalize this. You decided to do something in the name of free speech to push your political worldview on the students. 70 showed up, right? Huge, huge return for your money. And just out of curiosity, where is the abstinence expert you brought in? I guarantee you could have brought an abstinence expert in and wouldn't have charged you, they wouldn't have charged you a dime. You'd have gotten a bigger crowd to show up. And if what you really care about is free speech and openness, why not provide the abstinence argument or the monogamy argument alongside the pornography argument?
We have more porn stars. This time we're taking a look at Claremont McKenna College in California for Sex Week. So every year, this is the second year they're doing this at Claremont McKenna College, but take a look across all of the United States. All of the colleges are doing these. There's a sex carnival for Claremont McKenna students to attend. They also had Mia Little, or Mia Lee, as she goes by in the adult entertainment industry. She was called a sexpert, and students were invited to a community discussion about sex, non-monogamy, gender, and consent. Following that presentation, students could stick around and learn Intro to BDSM that encouraged anyone curious about kink to get your questions answered and learn to support safer play when going beyond vanilla. Now, the important thing to remember about this entire situation, this Sex Week is put on by the Advocates for Survivors of Sexual Assault.
Yeah, so put on by those who have survived sexual assault, offering a clinic on how to beat, harass, spit on, pour hot wax onto the nipples of your boyfriend or girlfriend, right? This, again, it shows you where intersectionality, this whole goofy concept of intersectionality, the idea that all the liberal platforms, from transgenderism to environmentalism to feminism to Marxism to eco-criticism to queer theory, all those things now work together to become one huge conglomerate of progressive activism. How did we get in 10 years? Away from the idea that teaching kids to practice monogamy, teaching kids that sex and commitment, sex and family, sex and society go together. Why this anarchy when it comes to sex? And the only answer I can think of is because the progressives want anarchy in undermining all traditional values. Intersectionality, sex is one major way to tear down the traditions and values of the country.
Yeah, and they claim that the underlying intention of Sex Week is to engage the student body and make affirmative, enthusiastic consent a cultural norm. We have a wide range of topics by a diverse group of sex educators, including queering safer sex and sex after trauma. And the advocates for this are basically taking their time to whine about how their money actually got cut a little bit this year. Last year, $5,000 is apparently the porn number this year. But last year they got $5,000 from the student fees, and this year the amount was cut about half. And the one of the advocates said it kind of seemed like CMC wasn't being as supportive of this event as they could have been. I wonder why. They shouldn't have been paying any money because your student fees shouldn't be going at all to these type of events.
Well, look at the entitlement, right? That we are entitled to put on sex clinics. We are entitled to put in every freshman's gift goodie bag a vibrating dildo. That we have every absolute right to expose kids, to use their own money to expose them to more and more radical kinds of sexuality. Sexuality like BDSM, which in many respects runs against typical feminist narratives. The idea that a woman can volunteer, it's all about consent, right? The feminists tell us that no woman can consent to be abused. Any woman who has an abusive husband can't consent to that. If she says she loves the husband, the feminist, and she stays with the husband, she is not in her right mind, we're told, right? She's been co-opted by the patriarchy. And so she can't consent to that. But you can consent to have your girlfriend whip you and flog you and beat you and spit on you. So this is all about consent, right? And it's amazing to me how the feminists get to decide what consent is, right? So we'll decide when you are co-opted by the patriarchy, and we'll decide when you're allowing yourself to be beaten, how you're overcoming the patriarchy by submitting. The stupidity of this is legion, and I just asked the question again. What you're not seeing on these college campuses is any sense of the opposite of this. Where are the seminars on abstinence? Where are the seminars on monogamy? Where are the seminars on spirituality and sex or morality and sex? And so for all this talk you want to have about open consent and all this talk about freedom and expression and broadening people's horizons, there are two sides to every story. And our college kids and now our high school and middle school kids are just getting one side. It is the side of sexual experience utterly divorced from any sense of responsibility and morality. Even the consent argument, they argue that we're being responsible by teaching these kids consent. No, you're not. Your whole platform is consent to everything. You're a bit of a prude, you're a bit backward, you're a bit fascist or repressive if you don't agree that all these are legitimate sexual options. And if you agree they're legitimate sexual options, why aren't you doing them yourself? That's how campus peer pressure works in every single circumstance.
And when we have the students paying for this in their student fees, they can also pay for it in their tuition dollars, because you can take a sexuality course that is going to tell you that we have no men and we have no women, but we do have people with penises and people with vaginas. At the University of Texas, Austin, the human sexuality course is being taught by clinical psychologist Michael Parent. He's claiming that this course is a scholarly examination of human sexuality, even though there are no assigned textbooks to the course or written materials. The course is teaching that gender and sex are societal constructs and sexuality is on a spectrum. Parent also normalizes the idea that some prepubescent children who identify as the opposite sex can begin medically transitioning. So let's listen to this. According to the College Fix, Parent told his college students that children as young as 7 should not be stopped from taking gender hormones. That way, they can pass better as the opposite sex as they grow older, he said. For example, these hormones can prevent PWPs, that would be the people with penises, also known as boys, from developing facial hair in a masculine jaw.
The most shocking aspect of it is that you have an adult teacher, professor, telling his students that children, prepubescent children, as young as 7 years old, should be allowed to begin hormonally transitioning to the opposite gender if they want to. And what are the consequences of this sexuality that is just radically accepting, right? We will criticize no sexuality. We will reject no sexuality. We will encourage kids dramatically in the classroom, on the quad, in their dorm rooms, to sexualize. You see how radical this becomes, where this professor is basically arguing there is no such thing as male and female. There are just people with penises who can be male, female, or neither, and people with vaginas who can be male, female, or neither. This is antithetical. This is a complete rejection of biology. It is a complete rejection of chemistry, of empiricism. It is a complete, utter takeover by radical sexual anarchists. And there is no way to escape it. There is no normative sex. There is no way to look at the other side of the story here. The idea that even now scientists have to be careful what they say if they begin to argue that sex, let alone gender, are actually things anchored in more than nature. We've seen, for every one of these stories, we see dozens of professors and students getting in trouble all across the country for daring to suggest, hey, wait a second, you guys are going on and on about this, but isn't biology still a thing? Doesn't science and the empirical method on a college campus matter anymore? And the answer is no. Science must take a back seat to the social engineering of professors and using their own kids and the state taxpayers' dollars against those kids.
Yeah, and this thing is Michael Parent. He's been in the news before. We've reported on this. He was part of the one who created the masculine UT, and eventually it was suspended because media got wind of what he was promoting, saying that masculinity should be treated as a mental illness.
That's right, a mental disorder.
Masculinity is you're mentally ill, but hey, people with vaginas and people with penises.
If masculinity is a mental disorder, then people with penises, by definition, are mentally disordered unless they're women. Unless they're people with penises who identify as women. So the only way you can be a non-mentally ill person with a penis is if you're actually a woman, right? You claim to be a woman having a penis. And so this is the dark, dark underside of this, Katie, that we've tried to get at in the last 2 or 3 stories here today. It's not so much what you're normalizing. It's what you're demonizing, right? In normalizing all of this radical sexuality, in normalizing this sex without morality debate, in normalizing these radical sexual choices that are undermining biology, chemistry, that are taking away science's ability to even speak about those things, you are demonizing those who don't go along. Only 70 people showed up to see Nina Hartley speak on pornography. But the implication is, if you are the other 4,000 people at that college who didn't show up, then there's something deficient in you. You are prudish, you are somehow backward, or you are masculine in a way that is offensive, right? You see here what's happening now. They are not simply liberating alternative sexualities. They are using this as an opportunity to condemn traditional sexualities as offensive, harmful, dangerous, and toxic.
And what's really interesting is that this course is being listed by UT Austin students as one of the top 5 courses to take to basically boost your GPA. So when you put out a list like that, top 5 courses boost my GPA, of course you're going to sign up. You don't care what the topic is. So this class alone, in the how many semesters it's been taught, how many students have gone through this class and heard all this gibberish?
Well, you mentioned there's no reading list.
Yeah, there's no reading
There's
list.
nothing to read. Well, of course.
Of course.
So you listen to this, put the picture of that clown show back up there. You get to listen to this guy basically lecturing everybody about his own personal sexual preferences. This is the guy, without a syllabus evidently, without any reading, any actual evidence to support him, is lecturing your kids about how there's no such thing as male and female. And UT Austin, how much money are you paying this guy? Kids, how much money are you paying to support this guy? And of course, why do the kids gravitate to the class?
Easy A.
Because they just show up. You wonder if you even have to show up for a class like that to get an A. There are people in their seats and there are people not in their seats. We can't distinguish between the student who shows up for class and the student who doesn't. That would be unfair. So I'm pretty sure why kids are boosting their GPA on the back of this garbage. But the problem is, this is we're seeing across college campuses across the country is becoming more normal. The normal thing to do is now to condemn masculinity, to condemn traditional sexuality, to condemn heterosexual, heteronormative relationships. These are all exclusive, these are all boring, these are all toxic.
So we started with, we have our tuition, our student fees going to basically these, bringing the porn stars in to talk to us. Then you can pay money to be in classes learning about sexuality, and what you get as a result is op-ed stories from students arguing about whether virginity is even a concept. Because according to Annabelle Costa, she wrote an op-ed for the Daily Nexus. It's a publication for the University of California, Santa Barbara. Again, not shocking. She says the definition of virginity is unqueer. I see what she did there. She says her thesis states that virginity doesn't even exist because, quote, by definition, it refers to the first time someone has sex. But sex can mean different things to different people. And as a queer woman, she feels sex is culturally defined and navigating the world as a queer person is that much more confusing. Quote, we often miss out on having those stories about our first time because no one ever talks about what that would even look like. And I'm not going to even...
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to go there as to describe what it would look like. But she concludes, I would say I lost my virginity the first time my girlfriend saw me naked and I felt most vulnerable, but also my most beautiful. She says another time she lost her virginity. I'm not going to...
Yeah, so
that second
multiple virginity. There's no such thing as virginity, but you can lose it multiple times.
And
that's right.
Exactly. I could even argue that with each new partner, I am losing my virginity over and over again because I am learning to be vulnerable with someone new. I mean, that makes perfect sense.
So you could be a porn star, sleep with 5,000 people like Nina Hartley has, and be a virgin every time, and be a virgin when it's over.
Yep.
And so we're back to where we started. And this is what we've been trying to tell you. Do you see now how virginity is under assault as well? Why? Because virginity is abnormal now. To be a virgin, to promote virginity, to promote chastity as a really wonderful historical concept going back thousands of years, to choose voluntarily not to have sex doesn't make you consent. It makes you weird, right? And so virginity, by that argument, wouldn't you lose your virginity by coming through your mother's birth canal?
I would.
I mean, wouldn't that be in a way?
We all lost it there.
Think about it. I mean, the origin of virginity there, pushing through the vaginal walls. From the moment you are conceived, born as an infant, into this world, you are no longer a virgin. And of course, you see what's happening here. Some glib little undergraduate writing a stupid story. She sees all her mentors. She sees all of the faculty. She sees all the sex clinics on her California campus. And she decides, well, let's take it further. I'm 18 years old. I know more. They're not radical enough for me. Let's deconstruct virginity altogether.
And her very last statement is, whatever your moment is, the point is that it doesn't matter. Sex is whatever it feels like it should be to you and your partner. Plus, virginity is made up anyway, so who really cares? If that's not the most nihilistic, just put the period on the end of that sentence with what is happening at your university.
Postmodern, progressive, nihilistic doublespeak. It is meaningless, right? Virginity doesn't exist because we've reached to find the word away. How? In other words, you see what the implication is. Those of you who are virgins, those of you who have made a conscious choice not to have sex, you're not really virgins. Notice what the implication is. Christian values like chastity are not only foolish and wicked, they are impossibilities. Talk about dumbing down our moral outlook the same way we're dumbing down, in the case of this little moron, critical thinking skills, right? We're dumbing down curriculum. We're dumbing down what our kids can read. We're dumbing down serious definitions, not just of their educational values, but of their moral and personal ones too. This is a bad time coming down the road.
Yeah, these are our future journalists right there, because that's what they're putting out at the student newspaper. All right, well, we have a hot mess going on over at Seton Hall University in New Jersey. They just ended a 10-day sit-in that was led by Concerned 44, a group protesting students who represent the 44% of students at Seton Hall who are in the minority, whether that be for their race, color, sexual orientation, or gender identity. So more than 300 students of the 9,800 students that are at this university over the course of these 10 days participated in this protest. And you might be wondering, well, what were they protesting? Pretty much everything. In the way they protested, I'll go with that first and then say what they actually had for demands. They sat in at President's Hall and they got basically a permit to sit in at President's Hall for 3 days. They slept there. If you looked at the image, you're like, this looks like they're staying in a nice little hotel. There was security present. They had to have a name on the list. It was like a VIP club. You had to have your name on the list to get in.
Is it actually a protest if you're invited and given hotel accommodations?
For 3 days.
If you actually have to fill out a permit to protest, you get to bring your sleeping bag.
Yep.
Then they clean up after you and have chambermaids. Is this really a protest?
Well, yeah, and then on top of it, the president and the provost and all of them moved any meetings they had out of there so that they could have their space. Then these students, they provided a list of demands. I'll get to that in a minute. But they also had a protest at the University Club, which is like the dining hall. And they alleged that a history professor named William James Hoffer shoved one of the student organizers. And the student, of course, claimed this on Twitter, because that's where you claim everything. And the professor denies it. He says the physical contact that they are complaining of is when I held out my hand to tell them to stop and came in contact with one of the students' shoulders. I withdrew the hand immediately, and we proceeded to engage in a very heated exchange because they were shouting at me and I couldn't be heard. And you can see video footage of this, and there's no physical contact whatsoever. All right, so again, what are they protesting about? Well, they want full-time faculty hired to be dedicated to Africana studies and the Latino studies and Latin American studies. They want reconstruction of the university's Office of Equal Employment Opportunity in Title IX. They want university-allocated funding for Black history, Hispanic Latino history, women's history, and Islamic history months. And they want permanent student review board to help oversee faculty hiring at the university.
Yeah, and so in other words, they want to completely remake the university in the image of themselves. The minority, it's a pretty huge minority, right? 44% of the student body considers itself some kind of a minority.
Some kind of a minority.
Could be
race,
anything,
color,
right?
sexual. Yeah. I'm short, so I'm a minority.
You're an economic majority. You're an untenured majority, right? The whole thing is, but the shocking aspect of the story is the one we haven't got to yet. Despite this raucous behavior, despite the fact that the university went out of its way to accommodate the protesters, they even moved out of their own administration building to let the protesters occupy it, and hired people to come in and clean up after the protesters. Basically, they switched dorm rooms for a couple of days. Despite all of that, despite the fact that they made up they argued that they were assaulted, one of them, when it didn't happen, and there's proof it didn't happen. What did the university do?
Oh, they caved everything.
They caved in. Everything these kids wanted. And so if you're a young 19-year-old radical who has learned from the government schools, public schools, and learned from your freshman seminar about no such thing as male or female, you've learned all these things. All you've learned in your education is that everybody's being oppressed all the time. Then you get to campus and you band together in small groups of 40. You can completely change the university. Here's my thought. What in the world is the university administration for if they are being dictated to across the country by their kids, by freshmen and sophomores who don't have degrees, by freshmen and sophomores who are terribly unarticulate, who behave like mobs, who issue demands and fabricate stories, fabricate hate crimes? That rather than the university standing up to these kids and saying, hey, why don't you learn a little bit first? Trust me, we are so liberal, by the time you graduate, you will see how radically liberal we are. No, rather than that, the universities are caving in. So we have given up our teaching function at universities. We are here to be lectured at now. We are here, and again, it's only progressive kids. If you had 400 as opposed to 44. Conservative Christian kids seek to occupy the office of the chancellor or the administration building. No way would they have let it happen. They wouldn't have moved out. They wouldn't have hired this out. If you had 200 Republican kids demanding courses on conservative history or conservative values, Conservative History Month, there is no way this would be countenanced on a college campus. If you're a small, even a small group of 10 or 15 minority kids in a college campus, you can pretty much hold hostage huge universities. You will be given what you want, and you'll be given what you want because the faculty largely agrees with you. Let's get rid of all Western teaching. Let's get rid of all Western values. Let's completely undo the Constitution. Let's completely undo traditional notions of American history. Let's do away with all of that in the name of social justice and completely reorient universities to be nothing but factories for progressive ideology. That day is upon us. And here's the thing, it's not going to get any better. You keep saying, well, when are the adults going to stand up? The adults are the kids. We have ceded all the power at universities because the kids are arguing, because they're minorities, they don't have any power. And the institutions of America are all racist. Guess what? That includes the institutions of higher learning. By definition, they are racist. This is what their own faculty are teaching those kids. The college that accepted you, even though you couldn't read in an 8th grade level, we need to raise our diversity numbers. We brought you here and you're not completely qualified. Despite that, we've given you huge scholarships, we've paid for your books for you as a way of giving you a leg up, and we've taught you nothing. Nothing but no gratitude. We've taught you simply not that, what a great country that you don't even have to be able to do college work to go to college nowadays. We haven't taught you those moral lessons. We have instead taught you that everything we've done for you is not enough and we're all a bunch of racists. Our institutions, our universities are as complicit with racism as the corporate boardrooms are. So you now go out at age 17 and tell us why we suck, we're racist, and our response is, whoa, I guess that's what we taught you. And everything you ask for, we give you. And schools no longer are schools. They are not places with boundaries. They are not places where critical thinking and learning are pushed. They are not places where hard lessons of reality are used to show kids what's true and what's false. They are places where kids pretty much get to make up what they want to do. Think about what happened at Evergreen State University 2 years ago. And it almost won. They almost won, right? They chased faculty off campus. We saw the blowback from the public. Problem is that you have an Evergreen State College now on every major college campus in this country.
Well, and I mean, if you take this argument, what I got away from this with this article is it's not just at the college campuses, because what's going to happen is mom and dad at home, you may be thinking, well, okay, I'm never sending my kid to college, but it's not just happening at college. It's not like it's just, okay, well, now they're in college and that's where they begin indoctrination. It started way back in kindergarten, K through 12, and it starts with you as a parent. How have you parented your child? If little Johnny does something bad at school or little Sally gets in trouble, who do you blame first? Do you turn to Johnny and Sally and say, what did you do wrong? Or is it automatically the teacher's fault or automatically the principal's fault because little Johnny and little Sally can never do anything wrong? This sense of entitlement that we've seen, it's come in waves, and it's clearly at the universities now. It's been there for the past 10 years or going on more.
Well, and huge percentages of American moms and dads at the elementary, middle, and high school have decided that the people responsible for teaching our kids morals and values are the public schools. Yeah. We've abnegated our responsibility because that's the only answer you can have. When you see the degree to which these kids are coming back from, even as young as 6 and 7 years old, they're coming back from their schools convinced of things that the parents don't believe, and the parents' response is not to get angry at the schools. It is to side with the schools, right? The job of the schools must be we see how poorly educated, every new metric out there, right? Our kids are learning at horribly low levels. They're way behind where they were 30, 50, 70 years ago in terms of their ability to read, write, and to function. But what they're really ratcheted up on is ideology. We are graduating now from elementary, middle, and high school, and certainly from the colleges, the most culturally and technically ignorant kids in generations, who are also the most arrogant and entitled kids. I mean, this is an absolute blueprint for dysfunction, right? High levels of entitlement, low levels of knowledge and responsibility. That's what we're handing our kids. And the fact that moms keep sending their kids to these public schools, moms and dads don't seem to be that bothered by what their kids are learning, has a lot more to do with politics and ideology than it does with ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, because this is the big flaw of American public school system, right? The idea that a federal government now, it's responsible for making sure sure that every kid goes to school. All these schools are government schools, they're not public schools. You are paying with your property taxes for these schools, but you no longer have a say in them. They will tell you how they're going to teach your kids. They will tell you the sex, the morality, the philosophy, the ideology they will teach your kids, and there's nothing you can do about it. And if you don't like it, take your kids out of public school.
Preach on. All right, so let's go to those public schools. In Idaho, we had some teachers dress up for Halloween, because teachers all across the nation spent Halloween dressed up as big groups of themed outfits. The Middleton Heights Elementary, basically this group of teachers, or staff members too, dressed as the border wall. And so on each panel it says "Make America Great Again." And there was a lot of blowback for this, because we also had another group of teachers who dressed as like Mexican stereotypes. So they had the sombreros on and the maracas and stuff. And these photos of the teachers and the staff members dressed up got put on the Facebook page. And a lot of parents went a little bit crazy and basically expressed their dislike of what happened. So here's what happened. The superintendent, named Josh Milton, he announced the district was investigating the teachers' insensitive and inappropriate costumes. In all, 14 staff members right now have been put on administrative leave, paid administrative leave, and they are doing an investigation to look in on what this is happening.
What do you say? I mean, at this point, just ban Halloween, because that's where this is going. I mean, there's nothing you can do anymore. I mean, we have so given into this argument, right, that if somebody's offended, then everything has to stop. Unless. These are the same schools. I remember a couple years ago, remember May Day? Yeah. Remember Cinco de Mayo, I should say. Yeah. Remember in Cinco de Mayo in California, where you had, for that day, American public school kids were being told not to wear American flag T-shirts, because that's offensive. You may recall that in schools all across the country for Cinco de Mayo, some schools even took the American flag down and flew the Mexican flag. We had kids being warned that on this day, this is the day for particularly Mexican kids to celebrate their heritage, which means in American schools. So that became normative, right? This idea that these non-American kids who came from Mexico, I should say, oftentimes illegal kids, had the right to celebrate their holiday in American government schools. And if you didn't allow that, you were somehow racist against Mexican kids. Meanwhile, you have a situation here where, and no one, the progressives defended that. Here you have a situation where the progressives won't defend the right of teachers to dress in stupid Halloween costumes, right? So what we know going down the road here is the one-sided nature of this dialectic, if you could call this monolectic, this idea that if you're pushing the envelope from a progressive position, we're going to back off. There's nothing too progressive you can't say, nothing too progressive you can't assign, nothing too progressive you can't expose our kids to, including drag queens and pornography in the classroom. That's socially and culturally relevant. But to in any way, shape, or form dress or think or act or talk or behave in ways that give pause to or cause discomfort among the progressive element in your school, which is almost always the tiny element of the school, that will not stand.
Well, let's talk about the fake outrage with this entire thing, though, obviously, because it's not only that these people, the parents, were upset and expressed it on Facebook. Of course, we're going to start petitions. There's a petition on change.org stating that this is blown way out of proportion. Let the teachers wear their costume. There's another one on moveon.org, a petition saying these teachers need sensitivity training and they need to basically some say they should be fired for wearing their costume. And yet, what are all the stories we've been talking about today? All the indoctrination with sex and porn and everything else, and where is the actual outrage that is legitimate? We just get fake outrage because this is an easy target, cultural appropriation. Let's talk about what people are wearing, because that's as shallow as we are.
And it's not just shallow, it's insidious, because it's the message we're sending kids, teachers, professors at every level here is that to parody certain people is necessary for free speech on college campuses. To mock certain ideas is tenurable, protected speech. The freedom of universities to mock, to demean, to call out certain groups is necessary for the running of universities. But if you do it to any other groups, you're doomed. Right? And so, again, things like tenure. Tenure, the theory behind tenure for university professors is it protects professors, gives them the right to speak freely. But when 99% of your professors think the same way on these social issues, you're only protecting one kind of speech, right? The same professors who are defending to the death this clown at UT Austin to talk about how there's no such thing as male or female in his classrooms without a reading list are the same ones who are all over a kid on their campus who wears a sombrero to a Halloween celebration. Absolute tolerance for radical leftist positions, even when they mock and humiliate and demean. Zero tolerance for anything that offends one of their chosen protected groups. That's the world we live in. It's that dichotomy. It is and this, I said it before many times, this is how fascism works, right? What do fascists do? Their ideology is promoted, no matter how radical or dangerous or genocidal or racist their ideology gets, it will be allowed and encouraged. Anybody who's not part of that particular fascist movement, the little things they say, not saying anything, is enough to get you to run afoul of the fascist ideology. And so in this regard, college campuses and the American education system generally is moving rapidly toward a fascist system where the radical progressives can say any radical thing they want, demand any radical thing they want. A small handful of progressive college kids can get universities completely transform their curriculum, completely change the way they do business, will move out of their own academic buildings to allow protesters to enter them. But you wear the wrong costume or use the wrong pronoun in class or object to the idea that science might argue against your gender engineering, and then the full weight and hammer of the law comes down on you. You cannot discuss that any other way than fascism, using the full power of the institution to promote certain ideas and to radically punish others that fall short of the ideological benchmark.
And with that depressing news, let's now go to the interview with Dr. Duke and Alex Newman.
Alex Newman, thank you for joining the show today.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Duke.
Well, should we really be surprised? When you think about the level of corruption in American education, from the implementers of Common Core to the writers of textbooks to these big federal testing scams, should we be really surprised, Alex, that the major magazines, the major organization whose job it is to tell us how our schools are doing and to rank them are also nothing more than a great big scam? Talk a little bit about what's going on with these publications.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you, Duke. And basically, this article just came out here. It's a cover story in Reason magazine, which is kind of an establishment-minded libertarian magazine. And what they did was they broke down the data from these education rankings, particularly U.S. News and World Report. And what they found is that it's based on flawed and ridiculous methodologies that reward states that waste a lot of money on schools and that don't have a lot of diversity, so to speak, while penalizing states that are more fiscally conservative and that don't force teachers to join unions and have a bunch of children in government care in pre-kindergarten ages. So complete fraud, this ranking system that they use, and it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, U.S. News and World Report is one of those ranking systems, magazines, that people actually base where they're going to move in the country on, try to get their kids the best education. When you look like you have, Alex, at the data, right, what exactly gets you a good ranking in U.S. News and World Report? It's pretty much money, right? The big progressive states that spend the most money get the highest rankings. And it doesn't matter if those kids can even read and write. Talk a little bit about that aspect of this.
That's right. I mean, they could be spending millions of dollars on each kid, and the kid's turning out dumb as rocks, and they'd be rewarded on the official rankings from U.S. News and Education Week and Wallet Hub because they're just spending a lot of money, right? Not because they're getting any results. And I think the reason why nobody's talked about this is because the establishment has a vested interest in pushing this notion that government should squander a lot of money on government education programs, and that big government utopias like the Northeastern states, for example, obviously would do better than the backwards conservative states in the South. And of course, the reality is not even close to this narrative that they're trying to paint. But I think that's why we haven't heard any of this before, is just because the establishment doesn't want people to realize that their narrative is a fraud.
Any state that requires kids or encourages kids to go to pre-K automatically gets ranked higher than states that don't, even though so much of the evidence we have suggests and demonstrates that kids who go to Head Start programs, pre-K programs, don't necessarily do better, and in some ways they do. Socially, they actually do worse. So consequently, the fact that you get extra points just because you force kids at younger and younger ages into government schools, that should set up a really send up a red flag for parents.
Absolutely. You know, what kind of a society are we when we give bonus points to our rankings for our state's school systems based on how young the government gets a hold of the children? You would think that it would be a good thing to have parents with the children for a longer period of time before handing them over to Caesar for so-called education. But instead, these states are being rewarded for Orwellian big government programs aimed at getting children away from their parents and into government care. It's incredibly problematic, and I think it illustrates the mindset that the people behind these rankings, the people behind these publications and these ranking systems have, which is that big government should run our lives, big government should squander more money on miseducation, and any states that resist those ideas ought to be penalized and demonized and so on.
Yeah, it's alarming to think that what they're really measuring for is guaranteeing the success of liberal programs. Liberal funding, liberal money, liberal influence, liberal ideology. Those schools that can be said to conform to those things, whether they actually produce results or not, are going to get ranked high. And you said those backwards conservative southern states, they're always going to be ranked low. And at what point do we as a society start to realize that money and education have very little to do with each other? The idea that you're going to pump, I mean, look at all these referendums in this election season, right? More money to build this and that, more money to build sports complex and fine arts communities. None of this has anything to do at all with the basic mission of schools, teaching our kids how to read, to write, to prepare them for college. We're doing exactly the opposite. And those schools that are spending the most on fruitless liberal indoctrination policies, those are the ones that rank the highest. You're going to think you're going to be getting my kid's the U.S. News and World Report says my Iowa kid, my Nebraska, my New Hampshire kid, he's at the top of the list because, look, they're in pre-K by the time they're 3 years old. We're spending all this money on social programs. We're going to measure people differently on the basis of their race. We're going to assign different levels of points to people based on their race in order to gerrymander these numbers to call for, wait for it, even more money and government intervention.
That's right. And you have news stories based on these. Say, oh, Florida got an F on its ranking this year because it didn't spend enough money, so legislators need to run out and go spend more money. Well, actually, when you look at the data that Reason compiled here, they made some very interesting little charts, and what they show you is that Florida ranks #1 for efficiency, right? They spend the least money on each child in terms of getting higher results, and they're almost at the top of the list in terms of getting better results as measured on the National Assessment of Educational Progress. They're in 3rd place. So it tells you that you don't need to squander a lot of money to get, what in government speak passes for a decent education. But unfortunately, Duke, this is what we see all over the place. I mean, this is what the World Health Organization does with the healthcare rankings, right? They give Cuba bonus points because the government runs the healthcare system, right? They give North Korea bonus points because the government runs the healthcare system. And then America is penalized because we still have some elements of the market active in our healthcare system. It's an absolute fraud, and people need to recognize that these rankings, whether we're dealing with education or healthcare or any of these other things, you got to ask the questions about who's making these rankings and what methodologies are they using, because clearly they're not using honesty.
Yes, you hit it 100% out of a home run on that, Alex. This is about control, about globalism, about reassigning who's responsible for our kids, about dictating and limiting parental authority over kids. Those are the things that are going to get you really high marks. When the North Koreans get bonus points, right, because their education or their healthcare systems are completely federally run, state-run, right, that is, to you and I, that's not a big bonus. It's not a plus. The bigger the organization running something like education, we've seen over the last 50 years, the less effectively they do it, but the more ideologically they do it. And that seems to be, Mom and Dad, what this is all about. Pay attention to what your kids are learning and bringing home. Pay no attention to magazines and publications and think tanks who try to get you to commit to a public school system that is not looking out for your kids primarily.
All right, for the last story, I wanted to end on a positive note for once. There's actually a cool discovery that was made of a class syllabus that's from 1941, and it's from W.H. Auden. He's a poet in the mid-20th century. You might know him as an English professor. I'm sure you do. He's done Stop All the Clocks, Night Mail, As I Walked Out One Evening. They found a syllabus that he taught a course called Fate in the Individual in European Literature. And this was at the University of Michigan. And on this syllabus, there are 32 books listed with over 6,000 pages of reading. And students were meant to read all of that in one semester. And so this was discovered actually back in 2012. But what's cool about it is that at the University of Oklahoma, they've created a course to mimic this. And while we can't do one semester, they did a 2-semester course because, God forbid, 32 books for a college kid to read in a semester. They decided, let's make this course, and so far it's been going really well. Initially, people thought, well, how dare you put something out like that? Millennials can't read that much. And so this professor, his name is Wilfred McClay, he said, you know what? If you challenge the students, let them rise to the occasion, and so far they have.
Yeah, I think that's right. We radically underestimate our kids. We don't give them the tools to succeed. We tell them that that the politics of learning overrides achievement, that they're better off not learning if they don't learn in some sort of solidarity. And so going back, we say we're going to end with a positive story. I think that's right. 75 years ago, one of my favorite poets by Auden is a great poet. One of my favorite poems of his is the Musée des Beaux-Arts, right? They knew the old masters. They knew what suffering was. Great poet. And yet, when he got to give a lecture class for a semester at a college, he gave this 200-book lecture plan. And everybody realizes a lot of kids didn't read all 200 books. But it was an absolutely staggering intellectual experience for the kids who took that seminar. And so good on you, University of Oklahoma, for trying to replicate that. I remember in my high school senior year, I went to a Catholic high school. My senior year, I read 92 books my senior year of high school.
Nerd.
Well, they were mandated. You call the college a nerd college. I was assigned 92 books. And we read them from September when school started till June till it ended. I read 92 books my senior year, including summer books. And made me one of the reasons why I became an English professor, right? Tell your story. You tell the story, Katie, about how you're dealing with some kids who are reading how many books again?
If they've started to read a book this semester, and it's November now, if most of them haven't, they're reading 2 books the entire school year. And this is high schoolers.
These are high school kids. So
either 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade.
You work with some high school kids, and you took a survey. You asked them, how many books are you reading over the course of the academic year? And what are they telling you? 2.
2, if they even know. Most of the kids don't know. They're like, oh, I don't know. We haven't read one yet.
We are almost at the Christmas break. We're almost at the Thanksgiving break, I should say. And we're 4 months into school now, and you've got kids who have not read a single book yet.
A single book.
Others will point out to you that there are actually 2 books on the syllabus for the whole semester. And they're not big books. It's not like you're reading the Brothers Karamazov and War and Peace. You're reading Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare, a wonderful but short 40-page play, and you're reading Lord of the Flies, a little high school book of about 200 pages. Those are the only books those kids will read. Now, are they going to read lots of excerpts about global warming and about transgenderism and about the sociology of homosexuality? Will they read little snippets of articles? Oh, absolutely, they're going to read those things. But they're not reading books.
Yeah, what's cool about this class, you can take a look at the list. It's online. But, you know, Shakespeare's in there with a bunch of his plays, and Blake and Kierkegaard, and Dostoevsky made it with Brothers Karamazov.
Now this is 75 years ago, right?
I know, but this is the course
That's right.
They're doing now, and at the time it was a 2-credit course, which is pretty crazy to think about. But I really liked what one of the students who took this course, modern day here at the University of Oklahoma, his name is Robert Bellafiore. He's a recent graduate. And he said he raved about the quality of the course that was taught. He said the most important takeaway from the course was the importance of demanding excellence from others. Our professors expected far more from my classmates and me than any other professors I'd had. They presented the course as a challenge and insisted that we could overcome it. Rather than overwhelming people and convincing them to give up, the course inspired us to rise to the occasion.
And that is a good place to end the show, because every other story we've seen today is about compromise, about compromising education for politics, about scaling back responsibility, about allowing groups of uneducated kids to completely transform curriculum. Every other story we've shown you today about bringing in outside speakers to undermine the idea of critical thinking, particularly when it comes to sexuality. The nice thing to know is that there are kids out there, they're probably called conservatives, who when you push them, when you demand excellence from them, when you actually assign them more than they can do, they can rise to the challenge. If we can ever get back, and I'm skeptical we can, if we can ever get back to that kind of a system again, rather than patronizing kids, condescending to them, and or entitling them, this is what we're doing, right? We're patronizing and condescending to them by holding them back artificially, by robbing them of a rich education in the name of social justice. So and then we're entitling them, right? We're telling them that their opinions matter more than everybody else's because they're young. This is their education, after all. They don't have any degree in education. They don't really understand how education functions. They haven't read much. They don't know much math or science. But they're entitled now to tell their professors what they will and won't learn and how they will and won't learn it. Entitlement and condescension. This is the two things that progressives bring to the table. They're entitling kids who are ignorant. They're turning them into little monsters on campus. This Frankenstein experiment is going to end really, really badly for campuses unless they get their acts together. But this shows you that you can ask much of kids, more than they're capable of. And while they may not always reach it, they will benefit from striving. We've lost that in American education for a long time. In fact, go back to the moment progressives dominated university campuses. That's the moment university campuses gave up trying to make kids the best they can be.
I was kind of ending on a positive note. It was almost there. Make sure you head over to Facebook, like our Facebook page, Freedom Project. And if you want to listen to the podcast version, we're on Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play. Leave us a nice 5-star review. Say all of the positive things about Dr. Duke and me if you want to put something nice on there.
And that does it for us this week on The Dr. Duke Show. If you like what you heard, please share the podcast with your friends. And if you want to help us and help the world, read a book, any book, read a good book. I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. For Freedom Project, we'll see you next time.